Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss a new regulation being imposed on British farmers in a few weeks. It's related to Brexit. Doesn't appear to be an EU regulation though, but a Tory government one, and it will mean a double hit for us because it'll mean lower exports hitting our economy and higher prices in our own supermarkets, increasing inflation. Sounds mad, doesn't it? But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So it seems traditional on Halloween, which is the anniversary of the last Article 50 extension we ever got, to discuss Brexit horror stories. And we seem to have another one here, a Brexit horror story for farmers this time. Not pumpkin farmers though, they seem to be all right. This is more sheep and cow farmers. So I have to confess that I am genuinely perplexed by this one. Our extreme Tory Brexit government are imposing requirements on British farmers that will hurt their ability to export and mean higher prices of British food in supermarkets in the run-up to Christmas. I'm scratching my head here. See, we've already been discussing the retained EU law bill passing through Parliament. This is the one that is intended to obliterate about 2,500 rules and regulations overnight at the end of next year. Can't happen because it would be devastating for our economy. Sunak is going to have to come up with some sort of fudge for it. But you can see how the general idea appeals to the Tories in charge of our country right now. Conservatives, particularly those further to the right, have a pathological disdain, even hatred of regulations. See, regulations are there to protect ordinary people, but they're a downright bother to the extremely wealthy and privileged in society. Or so they think anyway. They don't seem to realise that if you stop workers dying in your factory, you can actually maintain production more easily. But the idea of that bill fits with their political ideology. Regulation's bad, so let's dump over 2,000 of them in one fell swoop using Brexit as an excuse. But this new rule for farmers doesn't really make sense. Like right now, in order to satisfy the EU that their products are safe, farmers need to provide proof that vets have visited their farms on a regular basis. Fine, no problem. But now the government appears to be ramping it up by insisting on more than just evidence of the visit. It'll mean a load of extra bureaucracy related to the health of the animals and so on. Now, in theory, there's nothing wrong with that. That's good. Extra checks in the interest of safety, particularly when it comes to food. Brilliant. But there's a problem. We've got a shortage of vets in the UK, which means that we don't have the capacity for this extra work for the too few vets that we already have. In other words, with these new rules, it won't be possible for all farmers to get their documentation proving the regular visits from the vets, because each of these vets is going to be spending longer dealing with each individual farm, which means fewer farms can be visited or the visits will be less regular. The upshot of this is that the farmer can't prove that they've had a recent enough visit, and in that case they won't be able to sell to the EU, and 72% of our meat exports last year were to the EU. So if exports are hit, farmers are said to have no choice but to increase their prices for meat bound for the domestic market, so higher prices in UK supermarkets. And the mad thing about this is the extra bureaucracy seems to be nothing to do with the EU. If it was enhanced EU rules, you would think, okay, well, we've just got to deal with it. If we were in the single market, it wouldn't be a problem. Remember, even then it would still be a Brexit problem, but it would at least make sense. But it seems that the EU are actually happy with the current arrangements. This extra red tape is reported as a requirement of the British government only. A government that wants to increase red tape. A Conservative government wanting to increase red tape. No, I'm not getting it. Honestly, I can't think what benefit they think it brings them. I mean, chopping 2,500 UK regulations at the end of next year, that'll be incredibly harmful to us, which is why I don't think it'll happen. But it fits with their ideology. This is something that is harmful to us and doesn't fit with their ideology. What the hell? If fewer farmers can export, our trade deficit widens in favour of imports. If the knock-on effect is higher prices of meat in the shops, that means inflation increases at just the time you would think the government wants to bring inflation back under control. And this is supposed to happen in the middle of December. And you think, well, You know, this is an incredibly busy time of year for meat exports. I checked. December is the month with the greatest volume of UK sheep meat exports over the past couple of years, at least. For beef, March 2020 was a bit of a boom month, okay, but the general trend is for higher exports in December as well, which makes sense. I suppose that the timing means that farmers will probably already have their documentation with the current system, which the EU are fine with, and so it hopefully won't hit this Christmas. But what about next year? Next year, the year of expected recession. Oh, fantastic time to be increasing inflation and reducing exports. That'll help. By the way, it seems, just for the record, that pork exports should be fine due to a different regime. This seems to be essentially screwing over a lot, not all, but a lot of sheep and cow farmers, which is why I had to make doubly certain that this was the thing. You know, I was reading it in the Financial Times, and they tend to be reliable, but the story is also all over the trade journals as well. And unlike with a lot of the other Brexit bollocks we've had to put up with, genuinely at a loss to explain this one, like genuinely at a loss. I do hate it when something doesn't quite make sense. Like the Joker said, we're sort of okay as long as there's a plan, even if the plan is horrible. I get why the Tories are demonising migrants, as horrible as it is. It makes political sense for them, or so they think. I get why they're pretending to destroy a load of regulations next year. It fits their fantasy ideology. I even get why they pulled us out of the EU in almost the harshest form possible, even though most Tory MPs knew it would be a disaster. You know, there was a lot of pressure brought to bear, both from inside and outside the Conservative Party, you know, from Russian and other infiltrators who wanted to separate the UK from the rest of Europe. Tory MPs went along with it to stop their party splitting. That was it. None of these are good reasons for the pain they've inflicted upon our country, but they make sense. It fits a plan. The regulation doesn't make sense. It's a regulation-shy, pretty right-wing Tory government. It came into being in May, so this was under Boris Johnson. So, you know, fairly right-wing, not as right-wing as it got under Truss, but a fairly right-wing, regulation-shy government who traditionally rely on a lot of support from rural areas, imposing additional red tape on farmers in a way that's not required of our main export markets, that we don't have the capacity to comply with, which will reduce GDP, increase inflation as we look set to enter recession, and then a long period of stagflation for the rest of the decade. Makes no sense. And the only response from the government seemed to be, and I'll quote this because I do want to break it down a bit, "We are engaging with businesses and the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons to try and ease the burden on exporters in meeting these EU requirements." So first off, they're not EU requirements. When I read that, I actually thought, is it? Because that's why I wanted to double check, because then it would make sense. If the EU have extra requirements, then it would make sense. Then I would still do the video, but based on the idea if we'd stayed in the single market, it wouldn't be necessary. But I look through it again, it's like, no, it's not an EU requirement. You look through all the trade journals and no, it's not an EU requirement. Every article I've read made it clear that no, this is just the British government. This is a Tory government requirement. Second, all they've done to ease the burden is shift the date to December 13th to miss Christmas. Apparently they wanted it in place beforehand, which would have been devastating this Christmas as well as next Christmas. But again, you think to yourself, well, hang on a minute, if it's an EU requirement, how come they just got to change the date then? All I can think of is it's a deliberate attempt to close farms down, which in theory wouldn't make sense, but the Tories have been trying to do that, haven't they? Like they initially said, of course, they will replace the EU farming subsidies. Whenever people said, well, what about EU funding we get for this, that and the other, the government said, well, we'll just replace it. You know, then they said, oh, no, actually, we're not going to have the farming subsidies. No. So now farming subsidies have been phased out over the next few years to the point where they're gone completely. But the government offered cash incentives to basically get people to quit farming altogether. So they have a policy of wanting farmers to basically quit farming. Now, I don't know if their plan is to destroy British farms and then have the land bought up en masse by, say, American or Australian companies with the intention of pursuing intensive farming. But you look at the way the Tories are screwing over farmers who traditionally support the Conservatives, and you do wonder if it's not a deliberate move to just obliterate them. I don't know. Nothing else really makes sense. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.